Life processes. Today, we're going to discuss about the life. What is life? Where does it exist? Life is found in the living things. The things that have life are called living things. The things that do not have life are called non-living things. You have been studying about the living things and non-living things since class 3, 4, 5 from your lower classes. You are learning about living and non-living things. And you learned that living things have some characters. Based on that, we can say that this is a living thing and this is a non-living thing. When you were studying about the living things in your class 3 or 4, you learned that this is a rock which cannot move on itself, so it is a non-living thing. This is a dog which can run, shout, bark, jump, so it has some movements, so this dog is a living thing. In such a way, on basing certain features, you could distinguish which is living, which is non-living. Say, the first one, we take it as movement. Movement is one of the features on basing which you can decide whether a thing is living or non-living. You see so many examples around you. A boy running, a man shouting. Shouting in the sense, where do you find the movement? The movement in his lips, in his mouth, he is shouting. A dog barking. So, we take the movement, a fish swimming, a bird flying, a horse running. So, all these things, they have some movement, either in their body or their body, whole body is moved from one place to another place, locomotion. So, this is one of the important characteristics of living things we consider. The second one, what do we see? Living things eat food. They take food. Living things, they take food. You see a cow chewing cud, a cow eating grass, a boy eating cookies, a boy eating his food. We all eat because we need energy to survive, to do our daily activities. So definitely we eat. So eating is also one of the feature. We can take it, eating. And what else we take? What other features we take to decide whether a thing is living or non-living? Growth. Living things grow. That means increase in their size. Living things increase in their size from time to time. A small baby, a newborn baby, is grown to a kid, from the kid to an adolescent, from an adolescent to an adult. So movement is one of the features by which we can distinguish living and non-living things, and the second one is eating, taking food, growing. The third one, living things produce the young ones of their own kind. That is, reproduce. Reproduce. Living things produce the young ones of their own kind. Dog gives birth to a puppy. Man gives birth to a baby. Such a way, every living thing produces own kind. A new one or an young one of its own kind, we call it as reproduce, and it is one of the features we can take to distinguish between living and non-living things. And one more, response to stimulus. Stimulus. You go near a small cat or any other small animal, by seeing you, it will be frightened and run away. If you go near a chicken, it runs away by making some sound. It is frightened. It responds to the stimulus. It finds it is the danger. You are the danger coming to catch it. So it runs. In the same way, even in plants, we see that certain plants, they show response to the stimulus. If you touch the leaves of touch me not plant, the leaves contract, they show some movement and they show some response to the stimuli. So this is the another feature by which you distinguish living and non-living things. But you cannot say this is a living or this is a non-living thing based on any one of the feature here. Simply just by looking at the movement, you cannot say this is living and non-living. Because you see, we see the movements in animals, movements in their body parts, and movement of the animal from one place to another place completely, locomotion. But we cannot find any movements in plants. In plants, we cannot see any movements to our visible, they are not visible to our naked eye. Of course, the roots of plants may move in the soil, but it is very slow and not visible. So, by looking at that, you may say that I don't see any movements in this plant. So, can you consider the plant is a non-living thing because due to the absence of movement? No. So, in your lower classes that is accepted, okay. You don't know what is happening in the cellular level or molecular level. So, there you have distinguished with the help of some movement, some features like movement, eating, growing, reproduction, response to stimuli. The second one, eating. You see the animals eating, visible to your naked eye, but plants, you don't find any plant eating directly. So you don't find any kind of movements, you don't find the plants eating directly except some parasitic plants. So you don't find the plants eating the food directly either through their leaves. They prepare their own food, but it is not visible to the naked eye. So on basing this, taking food, on basing this feature, you cannot distinguish this is living, this is not living. And growing, increasing in size. So this is also not the exact one to distinguish between living and non-living things. Living things grow, plants they grow in their size. Even animals grow in their size. Sometimes certain non-living things also grow in their size because of the climatic conditions, physical phenomena, they may increase in their size. But it doesn't mean that they have life. For example, we may observe the expansion of certain materials due to heat. So that means it increases in its size. But we cannot consider that is growth. We cannot consider that is that they have life. We cannot tell that they have life even though their size is increased. Sometimes certain materials absorb water and get imbibed, increased in their size. You cannot take it as growth. You cannot say that they have life in them. So we cannot take even this growth in its size, increasing in its size, it cannot be considered. And reproduction. So of course, we can consider this as it is a very important life process, only possible in living things, and response to stimulus. But even you see this reproduction or response to stimulus, sometimes, see for example, we have seen some animal like cow. A cow, whenever you go and touch the cow or you try to hit the cow with a stick, it responds. It moves away or it moves its head or tail. If you try to hit a dog with a stone, never do this, this is very dangerous. Just I am giving an example. The dog may bark at you or the dog may run away. So there is response and stimulus. You can take this response and stimulus. Yes, this is the character by which I can distinguish between living and non-living. But if the dog is sleeping, it is not aware that you have approached the dog, then there is no response. Will it mean that it is a non-living thing? If the dog is sleeping, it has not seen you, it didn't get your presence, then it is sleeping. It didn't respond. It doesn't mean that it is a non-living thing. So, apart from all this, of course, we can take these characters, these features to distinguish between living and non-living, but there are certain issues when you cannot explain alone with these features or characters, you cannot totally distinguish between living and non-living things. Somebody says that living things breathe. They breathe. That means there is a movement. You can feel the air coming in and coming out. Movement. But in plants, you cannot feel that there. Even plants breathe. So breathing is found in plants, but no one recognizes the breathing in plants. Even they breathe. So that is the one more thing. And the movements. Sometimes certain movements of living things are not observed, very minute, at small scale. Then can you say that if there is no movement, there is no life? Of course not. There will be movements which are very minute, which are not observed by us. And even though if anything has got very trace or minute movements, you cannot consider it as living. Say for example a material, a metal, it has some atoms in that. So in these atoms there are subatomic particles which are vibrating, moving. So there is a movement in this metal. So can you consider this metal as a living thing as it has got some kind of movement? No, it's not living, even though it has got minute movements. So at one particular level you cannot use these characters to exactly distinguish between the living and non-living. So what exactly living is? How will you define that? How can you know that what is living thing? What essential characters a living thing must have? So let us come back to this movement. By taking that or by using the visible movements, we cannot distinguish the living and non-living. Even in case of living things, there will be certain movements which are invisible. We can say them molecular movements. We call them as molecular movements. So in a living system, there are so many molecules which are continuously moving, changing their form, and it is a dynamic system. There we find an organization. Various kinds of molecules are organized into different structures. All these structures, they make up a unit called cells. Cells are organized to tissues. Tissues are organized to organs. Organs are organized to organ system. Organ systems are organized into an organism. So this kind of a structure hierarchy is found in the living systems. So the molecular movements are very important to say that it is a living thing. And how are the molecular movements? And how are these molecules are arranged? In a systematic order. There is a hierarchy. And it is not standard or stable. It is dynamic. It is ever changing. Sometimes these structures, they get destroyed. So it needs to be maintained, repaired. Some of the cells may be destroyed. So new cells are to be formed. Sometimes the cells may be damaged. So these cells are to be repaired. So this kind of system is existing in the living things. This is achieved by various processes. What is achieved? The maintenance. The repair and maintenance of these structures, it's keep on going in a living system. Once it stops, the repair and maintenance of these structures, the cells to tissues, tissues to organs, organ systems and organism, if it fails, it starts breakdown and the repair and maintenance is stopped, then the organism is dead. So the molecular movements are very important. And not only that, so if we find an organized system here, an organization is found, so this is what we can use to say that this is living and this is non-living. Scientists say that there are no molecular movements in virus. What do you say? Will you consider this virus as a living thing or non-living thing? So according to this, if you wanted to consider it as a living, a virus do not have any molecular movements unless until it enters a living system. Unless until it enters a living cell, it doesn't show any molecular movements. So what do you say? Living or non-living? So many people consider it is non-living as it is outside the living systems. It will be living, it will be considered as a living thing once it enters the living systems or cells. Because outside the cell, outside the living system, it's just a non-living thing. It doesn't possess any molecular movements. What are life processes? So here we have discussed about the main character by which we can distinguish what is living and non-living. So the living things, they have the basic feature. What is that? They have the movement of molecules, and these molecules, they make up the structures and organization. So this organization has to be kept there, and if it is destroyed, it has to be repaired and it has to be maintained. So for this maintenance, continuous flow of molecules is required. So how this movement of molecules takes place, how the supply of molecules takes place for this maintenance job. So whatever the organization is there, cells to tissues to organ system, organization, the organism. So the organism, it has to live. For the condition of life, for the condition of living, it has to be maintained continuously. The repairs has to be done. The needed energy has to be supplied. So this is the repair and maintenance job. It keeps on going on even though the organism is not doing anything in particular. Say for example, today is a holiday for you. So you're not doing any job over there. You're not going to school, you're not playing, just you're sitting in the sofa and watching TV. So just you're sitting or relaxing on the bed. Even then, you need energy. Even then, in your body, the life processes, they have to go on in the sake of maintenance of your systems. So even though you're not doing any job, your systems are to be maintained and repairs has to be done. So even though you're not doing anything particular, that means your body needs supply of molecules for the process of maintenance. So your body needs energy. So from where these molecules are supplied to you, you get the continuous supply of molecules through your food. We call this life process the process by which the food, that is the chemical molecules that are supplied to the body for maintenance and growth, it is nutrition. So nutrition is the process in which you obtain the materials needed for your body, either for production of energy, either for growth, repair, maintenance and all such. So that is nutrition. Every living thing, it need to have the life process nutrition. Nutrition is a very important life process. One of the important life processes, because it is the main thing which supply the energy to your body in the form of molecules. So energy is present outside in the sun, solar energy. It is transformed to chemical energy in the form of food material, food substances, either fruits or vegetables or cereals or pulses, whatever you eat as food. So the food contains energy in the form of chemicals or molecules. By the process of nutrition, these molecules are taken in and the energy is released in your body and supplied for the different purposes like maintenance. So not only maintenance, growth is also required. When you are at a growth period, so we grow till certain age. So thereafter there will be a lot of maintenance in the body. Since you are growing up, you are a growing kid, in your body the bones are to be grown, the muscles are to be grown and different things, blood vessels, nerves, everything. So all these need supply of molecules to grow. Most of our systems, many parts of our body and cells are made up of or built up of carbon molecules, carbon-based molecules. Hydrocarbons, fats, proteins, amino acids, and carbohydrates. All these are carbon-based molecules. So we need a continuous supply of carbon-based molecules from the environment. So this is done by the process of nutrition. So these raw materials are supplied to serve the first purpose is maintenance. That is the repair and maintenance of our body. That is the first one. For that purpose, energy is supplied in the form of chemical molecules. Second one is growth. So here we identified one life process, that is nutrition. So here we identified one important life process, that is nutrition. So nutrition in the sense the living things obtain the necessary materials from the environment. So that is called as nutrition. It includes how the organisms obtain their food, the molecules necessary for maintenance and growth. So that comes under nutrition. The food is available in different forms in the environment. The energy is available in the environment in different forms. Of course, our cells may need different form of energy, but the energy is present in another form in the outside world. So the transformation of energy has to take place. So we have eaten some food, fruits, vegetables, cereals, pulses. All these things, they contain so many molecules, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, these kind of different molecules. That is the chemical energy. But our cells, they need energy in the form of some other molecule, so-called ATPs. So a cell needs ATP, but you cannot directly eat ATPs from outside world. So by the process of nutrition, you have obtained something which is called as a protein, which is called as a carbohydrate, which is called as a amino acid. You cannot get ATPs directly. So your cells need ATPs to make energy. Your cells need ATPs for maintenance. Your cells need ATPs to produce energy. So whatever the molecules we take, they are to be converted into the form of energy which is needed by the cells for the movement of molecule in the cells. So this is done by another life process. We are taking food. Our food, the major part of our food is carbohydrates, which give energy. So you are eating carbohydrate, rice or wheat in the form of chapati or roti, rice in the form of steamed rice, along with some vegetables and other things. So the major part is carbohydrate. So this carbohydrate, it's a carbon-based compound. It gives energy. How it gives energy? This is achieved by another life process called as respiration. The second one, respiration. In this, the molecules like glucose are oxidized. Here the substances are oxidized and reduced to convert the molecules which you have taken as food into the form of energy. So energy is released from the food by a life process called as respiration. So we discussed that for the maintenance of life, for the maintenance of structures in a living system, various life processes are essential. So among those, we identified the first one is nutrition and the second one is respiration, in which different reactions like oxidation, reduction takes place to convert the molecules which we have taken as food into the energy, into the form which can be easily utilized by the cells. That is respiration. So we'll see what is this respiration, what are the different kinds, phases of respiration, what are the various steps and how the process of respiration takes place in the coming up sessions. We'll see what is that. But here we identified the second life process and its importance. So in this life process, again we find two different things. So this life process, it involves two major things, that is collection of oxygen which is required for the breakdown of molecules. So this oxygen is collected from outside. In nutrition, food materials are collected from outside, whereas in respiration, oxygen is collected from outside, and this oxygen is used for breakdown of materials, oxidation and reduction reaction. So for that, oxygen is required for oxidation. So this is acquired from outside. These two are under this life process respiration. So the materials which are present outside the body, they are taken into the body. How they are taken into the body? If it is a very simple unicellular organism, a amoeba, you can take amoeba as an example. It is having only one cell. It is a unicellular organism which can interact with the environment directly. If any materials are to be transported in, out, either solid, liquid or gaseous materials, they can be directly transported from their body to the environment and from the environment to their bodies by a very simple process called diffusion. Because their cells are exposed to the environment. They have only one cell which is exposed and interacted with the environment directly. But whereas in case of multicellular organisms, they have some systems. They have some organizations. The cells inside the body are not directly interacting with the environment to collect the food material, to collect the oxygen and to send the waste out. So they have different organs which are made up of muscles, and these organs are organized to organ systems. So in such a way, we will find an organization of various systems. So there are different systems. So for these life processes, the materials are to be transported. So the respiration, it goes in the respiratory system. The nutrition, it goes in the digestive system. The materials from the digestive system, they are to be transported to the respiratory system for the respiration. So there is a necessity of transport in multicellular organisms, which is not needed in case of unicellular organisms. Because in multicellular organisms, the life processes are carried at different places, in different organ systems. Nutrition in the digestive system, respiration in the respiratory system. So the materials, the molecules, they are to be transported from this system to this system. That is achieved by transport system or circulatory system, and that is also one more important life process. You call it as transport or circulation. So you need supply of these materials from one system to one organ system to another organ system. And at the same time, the materials are entering into our body in different forms. These materials are converted into another form which are easily absorbed and utilized by our body, by our cells of course. The cells break down these substances to get the energy. The cells break down these materials to get the needed parts of them, and certain things are left as waste. Byproducts are produced in these chemical reactions. So all these are chemical reactions which are happening inside the cells. We can call them as biochemical reactions. As a result of these biochemical reactions, waste products are produced in our body. So again, there is a necessity of sending all these waste materials that are produced inside the cells or inside the body are to be sent out. Again, if you look at single-celled organism, they have direct interaction with the environment. If there is any waste produced inside the cell, can be thrown out simply into the environment. But it is not possible in case of multicellular organisms, as their systems are very complex. They have number of cells organized into different organ systems. So again, there is the necessity of another life process, that is excretion. by which all this waste is sent out of the body. The waste that is produced during the chemical reactions that takes place as a part of maintenance of our body. So the wastes are sent out of the body by this excretion. So there is a necessity of another life process. So all these are the various life processes, but their main aim, of course, the nutrition is doing a different job. The digestive system is doing a different job. Respiratory system is doing a different job, and circulation is doing a different job. Excretion is doing a different job. Even then, the ultimate goal is to repair and maintain the body. The maintenance of the body is main goal. So for the maintenance, it is collecting the materials, and this is converting the materials into energy. And here, between different systems, the circulation is transporting and supplying the materials from one system to another system. And during the process of conversion of materials into energy, byproducts, waste is produced, and removal of the waste is done by the excretion. It is done in the process called as excretion by the excretory system. So here we can understand that life processes are found in all living things. Even though it is a single-celled organism like amoeba or a multi-celled organism like a human being. But here, what difference do we find? The various life process, what we have discussed so far, that takes place in this single-celled organism. So in this organism, nutrition takes place, respiration takes place. Of course, circulation is not required. As it is a single cell, it can directly interact with the environment, and it can get the materials directly and send the waste out directly. So whereas you see that here excretion takes place in this organism, but it is very simple. It does not require any system, complex organs and organ systems. Even the circulation, it is not required, just a simple movement of molecules inside the cell. And even the respiration also, just oxidation of materials. It need not have complex systems to collect the oxygen, because it is a simple single cell which can directly collect the oxygen from the environment by diffusion. Even nutrition. So the life process takes place, but the complexity of these organ systems is very less. They don't need any organ systems to carry out these processes. Whereas in the multicellular organisms, the specialization of the tissues into organs and organ systems is found. If you see that simple animal to complex animal, if you take a complex animal like human being, various life processes takes place, and they are carried out by the well-organized organ systems. So these organ systems are well developed to execute each of these life processes for the maintenance of the body, for the survival of the organisms. So now in this chapter, we are going to see that each and every life process in detail, and what are the various organ systems that are carrying out these life processes, and what are the various organs, their functions, and how the processes are coordinated, that we are going to discuss in this chapter. Nutrition. In the previous class, we discussed about various life processes that helps in the maintenance of the systems, that helps in the maintenance of the structure or organization of an organism. So a living organism, it is living in the sense various cells in its body, various molecules in its body are to be maintained. If there is any damage, that has to be repaired. So an organism, to maintain this, it needs so many life processes. We identified so many life processes. Among those, the important one or the primary one is the nutrition. So we discussed that every organism needs the supply of molecules. So why do we need supply of molecules? Why do we need some materials from outside into our body? We need these materials for the purpose of maintenance, that is for the purpose of repair of damaged parts of our body, that is for the energy to grow and to do activities, different activities. And we need the supply of materials to grow, and the organisms need the supply of materials to reproduce. For all these, we need the supply of materials. So what are those materials? Nothing but the food items. Every organism, it needs food. Then, how these organisms get their food? How these organisms obtain their food from the outside world? Do all organisms are obtaining their food in the similar way? See, animals and plants, both are quite different. Animals, how do they obtain their food? They eat their food. We can see that with naked eyes. But plants, how do they get their food? They don't have any mouth parts even to take the food. Then how do they get their food? Different organisms get the food in different ways. So the process of obtaining the food is also a part of nutrition. So the nutrition, it includes how the organism is obtaining the food, how the organism is taking the materials from the outside world, and how it is converting these taken materials into the usable form in the process of digestion. That also comes under nutrition. So the basic purpose of food is similar in almost all organisms. Every organism, it needs food, that is to get energy to carry out its metabolic activities, to grow and to reproduce, even plants or animals. But the form of the food they take is different. In some kind of organisms, they take very simple compounds, simple substances. Say for example, if you see the plants, what do they take from the environment as a source of food, as a source of energy? They take carbon dioxide and water. So with the help of sunlight, these are made into some other useful compounds that is in the body of the plant. But what are the materials taken from the outside? Carbon dioxide and water. These two are very simple inorganic compounds. Carbon dioxide, water. Simple compounds. But some organisms, they take much complex, a bit higher than these simple compounds. If you see bacteria or if you see fungi, so they take some substances which are found in the decomposed bodies, dead and decaying matter. So from them they take. If you see the higher animals like humans, what do we take? We take complex molecules. Complex molecules. Humans or other animals, they feed on plants. They cannot make the food material directly from the sunlight. So plants, they are taking the simple substances from the environment like carbon dioxide and water, and they are preparing the food. So these kind of organisms are called as autotrophs. So the green plants are called as autotrophs as they use the simple substances like carbon dioxide and water from the environment in presence of sunlight. So they prepare the food materials. These are autotrophs. And whereas the other organisms, including the animals and fungi, other animals, humans are a part of animals, and fungi, so they get the food from other animals, from other organisms, even plants. So animals and fungi, they are dependent on plants for food. They are called as heterotrophs. Heterotrophs. So heterotrophs are the organisms that obtain their food from other organisms. It may be plant or animal. So the animals and fungi, they depend on other organisms for their food. They may depend on plants, they may depend on animals. So this kind of nutrition is called as heterotrophic nutrition, and whereas the nutrition that is found in the plants is called as autotrophic nutrition. Autotrophic nutrition. So we discussed that in green plants, we find a kind of nutrition called as autotrophic nutrition. So green plants, they require two things. One, carbon molecules, carbon. This is to form their structures, that is for their growth, for the formation of new cells and structures. carbon is required. Carbon requirement is there for plants. And at the same time, energy. So these are the two requirements, carbon and energy. These two requirements are met by a process called as photosynthesis, by which the substances are supplied to the plant. So plants, they use the substances, simple compounds like carbon dioxide and water. These are the two simple materials found in the environment in presence of sunlight. So that is, with the help of sunlight, these two substances are converted into carbohydrates. Carbohydrate. There are so many kinds of carbohydrates, but here a very simple carbohydrate named as glucose is made in the process of photosynthesis. So it is a process in which simple substances like carbon dioxide and water are converted to glucose, C6H12O6. So this substance, this is an energy packed substance, and this is a carbon compound, carbohydrate. So this is prepared in the process of photosynthesis in autotrophic nutrition. So now this glucose, it is used for the energy requirement of a plant. Plants, they need energy for their cellular activities, for their metabolism, repair and other things. So the energy is supplied from this glucose. The excess glucose is stored in the form of starch. The excess glucose is stored in the form of starch. In plants, the additional glucose is used in the form of starch, which can be used by the plant when there is no supply of food, when there is no photosynthesis. So this is a reserve food. Starch is a reserve food. When the plant is not able to make its food, and if it has got some requirement of energy, then this starch is mobilized, converted to glucose and used for energy. The similar thing happens in our body. If you take more food, the excess carbohydrates in your body, the excess glucose in your body is stored in the form of glycogen. So in animal bodies, the glucose is stored in the form of glycogen. But in plants, the excess glucose is stored in the form of a starch. This is a complex carbohydrate when compared to glucose. Glucose is a simple carbohydrate which has got 6 carbons, but whereas starch is a very complex carbohydrate which is made up of so many glucose units. So now let us discuss about the photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is a process in which simple inorganic compounds like carbon dioxide and water are converted to carbohydrates. So this happens in the green plants, green parts of the plant, because the green of the plant is because of the pigment called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a very essential apparatus or structure for the process of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis takes place in the chlorophyll. It is an important cell organelle found in the green parts of the plant. So here, if we look at the equation of photosynthesis, 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water molecules, that is in presence of sunlight, they are converted to C6H12O6 glucose and plus oxygen. So we can observe one more thing here. Oxygen is produced as a byproduct in this reaction, in this process. So oxygen is released into the atmosphere in the process of photosynthesis. So as a part of nutrition of the plant, it is releasing oxygen into the atmosphere environment. So the total photosynthesis, it is a series of reactions. It is not a single step process. It is a series of reactions. Number of reactions takes place in that. So here, for our convenience, to study that in a simple way, we divided the total process into 3 major steps. What are they? The first one is absorption of light energy by chlorophyll. So the light energy, it has to be converted to chemical energy. Glucose is chemical energy. Glucose molecule has got energy. Energy is packed in the glucose. So which energy is packed in the glucose? Energy from the sun is packed in the glucose. That is what happens in the process of photosynthesis. The solar energy is packed into the glucose molecule in the form of chemical energy. So the energy transformation has to be taken place here. So the first one, absorption of light energy by the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is found in the chloroplast of this cell. This chlorophyll, it absorbs the sunlight because the leaves are exposed to sun, the green leaves. As they are exposed to sun, when there is sun, the chlorophyll is activated by the solar energy. The chlorophyll is excited by the solar energy. So the chlorophyll, it gets the energy from the sun. What does it do with the energy it gets from the sun? The second step, the light energy is converted to chemical energy. So whatever the energy is absorbed by the chlorophyll, it is passed to different things, different molecules to convert the light energy to chemical energy. So in the second process, the light energy is converted to chemical energy. So this energy is also used to split the water molecule. So in this process, as the chlorophyll is excited and passes that energy, the chlorophyll splits the water molecule. What does the water molecule consist of? Hydrogen and oxygen. One water molecule consists of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. So it is broken down into hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen are separated by the chlorophyll molecule. It splits the water. It is called as photolysis. So this is the second event. And the third one, the reduction of carbon dioxide to carbohydrate. So the carbohydrates are formed. The carbon in the carbon dioxide is used to form the frame, structure, skeleton of the glucose. So here, the third one, reduction of carbon dioxide to carbohydrates. The carbon in the carbon dioxide is used to form the skeleton or the framework of this glucose, C6H12O6. So these are the 3 steps. But you need not think that the 3 steps happens immediately one after the other. There may be some gap between the steps. Depends upon the conditions. Because for the process of this photosynthesis, the materials like carbon dioxide is required, water is required, sunlight is required, chlorophyll is required. So chlorophyll is there in the parts of the plant. But sunlight is not available all the day. It is limited. Even though in the daytime the sunlight is available throughout the day, only certain times, certain wavelengths of the sunlight is only absorbed for the process of photosynthesis. So even though in the midday the sun is very bright, plant cannot, because the plants, they close their stomata to prevent the loss of water. So they cannot take any carbon dioxide for the photosynthesis. So there are exceptions, like these steps, they may not happen immediately one after the other. Say for example, in desert plants, you see that in the daytime they cannot take carbon dioxide because their stomata are closed to prevent the loss of water, transpiration. Because in desert it is very hot. If the plant keeps its stomata open during the day, all the water present in the body of the plant is evaporated. So daytime they close their stomata to prevent the loss of water, and night times they open to get the carbon dioxide. So some material, intermediate material is kept prepared, get ready. So which is acted by the light absorbed during the day. So these events may not happen immediately one after the other, but these are the various events by which a green plant can prepare its food in the form of glucose. So we have discussed about the process of photosynthesis and what are the various events or steps in the photosynthesis. Now let us look at the location of the photosynthesis. Where does it take place? How the autotrophs like green plants able to get the materials like carbon dioxide from outside into their bodies. So leaf is the major site or part for the process of photosynthesis. If you just look at the cross section of a leaf, this is a leaf which is cut here. So in this part, that means between the upper and lower surface of the leaf, there is a collection of cells, tissue found in the leaf, at which the process of photosynthesis takes place. So if you look at this cross section, if you cut the leaf into 2 halves, so in the edge, here you cannot see the cells with your naked eye. but if you take a small bit of it and observe it under a microscope, you will be able to see this kind of picture. So you will be able to see this kind of structures in this area of the leaf. So let us see what are these spots and how they aid or help to the process of photosynthesis. If you look at the cross section of the leaf, the top surface of the leaf, it is covered by a waxy cuticle. How is the cuticle? Waxy. It is a protective layer. So by that the leaf is not wet. It is protected from the water. So in the winter seasons you can see that the snow, it is condensed. The vapors that are condensed on the leaves in the form of dew, small droplets of water. So the dew, it doesn't stick to the leaf, it flows easily from the leaf because the leaves are covered by a waxy cuticle. It is a part of protection to the leaf. So just below the waxy cuticle you will find upper epidermis of the leaf, upper epidermis, a single layer of cells that form the top surface of the leaf called as upper epidermis. So below the upper epidermis you find some tissue, means a group of cells. So how this group of cells are? You can clearly see that this group of cells are not very closely packed. They are not compactly packed. They are loosely packed. So this is called as parenchymatic tissue. As this parenchyma has got some special structures inside the cell. You can see some granule-like structures here in each and every cell. So these green color structures are called as chloroplast. So chloroplast is the actual site at which the photosynthesis takes place. The chloroplast, it consists of all the apparatus required for the process of photosynthesis, and it consists of a green pigment called as chlorophyll, by which the process is carried out. So this is the parenchymatic tissue which is loosely packed with air spaces. We can see the air spaces. Because it needs some air here, the carbon dioxide, it has to enter. From where does it enter? It has some pores on the bottom surface of the leaf. So you find the pores on the bottom surface of the leaf. Underneath the leaf you find the pores which are called as stomata. Stomata are the pores through which the carbon dioxide enters, or stomata are the pores through which the gaseous exchange takes place between the leaf and the environment. So these are the stomata. So how are the stomata? They are guarded by a pair of cells called as guard cells. So these guard cells, they operate, they open and close the stomata. What is the necessity of opening and closing of stomata? Why can't it be kept open all the time? There is a problem. If the stomata is kept open all the time, the water present inside the cells is evaporated by transpiration. So during hot climatic conditions, the stomata is closed to prevent the loss of water. So the stomata, it has to be operated, closing and opening. Depends upon the temperature, depends upon the availability of water and all other factors. The stomata is operated by closing and opening by these guard cells. So here we can have a close look at these guard cells in a different view. Here these are the guard cells and this opening is called as stomata. The stomata is open when there is sufficient amount of water in the plant or in the leaf. So when there is sufficient amount or levels of water, this water flows into the stomata and the stomata, they swells up. So then when the stomata are swollen, the pore opens, the stomata opens. So when the guard cells are swollen, the stomata opens and it makes the way for the exchange of gases. So when there is plenty of water in the plant, the water, it flows into the guard cells which make them swollen. There is no water. The plant is hydrating. The plant is losing water. Then these guard cells, they become flaccid like this. So they are not swollen. The guard cells are not swollen because water is not there. In such cases, the stomata is closed by the guard cells. So there is no exchange of gases. So in this way, depending upon the availability of water, the stomata is opened and closed by a pair of guard cells. So every stomata is guarded by a pair of guard cells which operate time to time, depends upon the conditions like availability of the water, temperature and so on. So we have seen the site of photosynthesis, the location of the photosynthesis and the requirements of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process in which carbon dioxide, water are converted to carbohydrate in presence of sunlight with the help of chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is very essential for the process of photosynthesis. It is found in the green parts of the plant, that is the leaves. So do all leaves contain chlorophyll? Yes, most of the leaves are green. That means they contain chloroplast. In that chlorophyll is present. So some plants, if you observe certain plants like crotons, they have variegated leaves. Means the leaf which is not having green color throughout, the green color is spread in the form of patches. So with the help of these variegated leaves, we can explain the importance of chlorophyll. We can show that chlorophyll is necessary for photosynthesis. We can show that if there is no chlorophyll, no photosynthesis takes place. If we see this variegated leaf, here we have some patches or some areas where green color, chlorophyll is present at these places. The other area is white, that means there is no chlorophyll. So now let us see the experiment by which we can prove that chlorophyll is necessary for the process of photosynthesis. So here we are taking a variegated leaf to do our activity. So what do we need for our activity to prove that chlorophyll is necessary for photosynthesis? We need a plant with variegated leaves. We can take some croton with variegated leaves. We need a potted plant. So first, this potted plant, it has to be destarched. So it should be kept in dark for 3 days. Why it should be kept in dark for 3 days? Because it is in sunlight, it is preparing the food, starch is present in the leaves. So we don't want any starch in the leaves. First, we wanted to destarch the total plant, the leaves. So we kept it in dark. So then we have taken the plant and kept it in sunlight for 6 hours. We have taken the plant and kept in sunlight for 6 hours. Now we kept the plant in sunlight for 6 hours. So there is photosynthesis, starch is prepared. Now you have to select and pluck a leaf out of that plant. So we selected a leaf like this. So this is a variegated leaf, that means it has got green patches here and the remaining area is white. So now we are going to trace this leaf, make a copy of this leaf for our further reference. That means later we can refer what changes happened, where the color change was happened. So in this way we are tracing the places where the green color is there in the leaf, we traced it. Now we are going to test this leaf for the presence of starch, where the photosynthesis took place in this leaf. So how do we do that? First, we have to boil this leaf in water. Keep this leaf in boiling water for a few minutes. Keep in boiling water for a few minutes. After that, keep this leaf in a beaker of alcohol. Now, this beaker, it has to be kept in a water bath, a small tub with water. So the beaker has to be kept in another container which contains water, and the whole setup has to be kept on fire, some burner. So here what we are doing, we are boiling the leaf in alcohol, but we cannot do that directly because alcohol is highly inflammable and there is a chance of catching fire. So never boil alcohol directly on flame. So we have taken the alcohol in a beaker and that is kept in a water bath. So by that, the heat is supplied to the alcohol to boil, not the direct fire. So with this setup, the alcohol starts to boil. Now what happens to the leaf? The leaf starts losing its color into the alcohol. The alcohol turns to green, that means the color in the leaf, it comes to alcohol. Now the leaf is decolored, it loses its color. Now take some dilute iodine solution. Iodine is used to test the presence of starch. When starch comes in contact with iodine, it turns dark blue in color. So now we have to take this leaf and dip it in the dilute iodine solution. Let us see what happens to the leaf. We dipped the leaf in this dilute iodine solution. So that leaf, the areas which were green earlier, they turn dark blue. The other area remains same, colorless. What does it mean? So here we have seen the white area, colorless area. There was no chlorophyll, no photosynthesis. Only in these patches there was green color. So only in these patches we find the dark blue color. Starch was formed only in those areas. What does it mean? Chlorophyll is essential for photosynthesis. If there is no chlorophyll in a particular part of a leaf, there is no photosynthesis. So it shows the necessity of chlorophyll. We can prove it with the help of this activity. Now let us look at one more activity which helps us to understand the necessity of carbon dioxide. So the necessary elements for photosynthesis, we have discussed that chlorophyll is important, carbon dioxide is important, water is important. If any of these things are missing, there is no photosynthesis, even sunlight. So we have seen that there in the first experiment, chlorophyll is necessary for photosynthesis. As there is no chlorophyll in certain parts of leaf, there is no photosynthesis, no starch found in those areas. Now, let us prove the importance or necessity of carbon dioxide with some other activity. So there you need a potted plant for this activity. You need a potted plant. So keep the potted plant in dark for 3 days to destarch it. Dark for 3 days to destarch. So we have taken 2 plants for this experiments. So 2 plants in dark for 3 days to destarch it. So now we have brought the plants out into the sun. When you keep it in dark for 3 days, the starch already present in the leaves is used up. Now there is no more starch in the leaves. So you kept the plants in sunlight, but you made some other arrangements. You have taken a bell jar and you covered the plant with these bell jars. So the bottom of the bell jar is kept in contact with that surface, and here you applied some grease or Vaseline to prevent the entry of air into this bell jar. So you don't want any air entering into the bell jar. And here you have taken one more bell jar and you arranged in the same way with Vaseline. Here also you kept it. Both the plants are in sunlight. So they are well watered before you keep the bell jar. So they have water, they have green leaves. That means they have chlorophyll, they have water, they have sunlight because they are in glass jars. So light can easily pass through. But what is missing? Air is missing. So you made that air is not available to these leaves, but you may get one doubt. So here is this much of room inside the bell jar. This room may have some carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Yes, you are correct. So that is that reason why we keep a small dish with potassium hydroxide crystals. What does this potassium hydroxide do? It absorbs the carbon dioxide present in this room, in this bell jar. So the carbon dioxide is absorbed by this. So there is no carbon dioxide available for this plant to carry out photosynthesis. You kept it in sunlight for few hours, some 5 to 6 hours. So after that time, you removed the bell jars and you plucked the leaf of this plant, say A, and you plucked the leaf of this plant B. You tested both the plants for the presence of starch. You know how to do the experiment. We have seen in that before activity. Boil the leaf in water, put it in the alcohol, boil it over water bath and remove that and dip it in dilute iodine solution. So you will find a difference between the amount of starch present in B and A. In which case do you think there is some amount of starch prepared? Is it B or A? Yes, it is B. Because here we made an arrangement and we avoided the entry of carbon dioxide, but still there is some carbon dioxide inside this bell jar by which this leaf can prepare the food. But here we have used the potassium hydroxide which absorbs the carbon dioxide completely. So there is no possibility of photosynthesis here. So by this experiment you can prove that carbon dioxide is necessary for photosynthesis. So in the autotrophic nutrition we have seen that how green plants are able to make their own food. So that is The materials, the simple materials like carbon dioxide and water which are present in the environment are taken up, and with the help of chlorophyll, using the sun energy, that is the light energy, these materials are converted to a substance called as glucose. Primarily glucose, which is the major source of energy even for the plant and even for the other animals, heterotrophs, which depend on plants. So this glucose, when it is prepared in large amounts, it is stored in the form of a starch. So plants or the autotrophic organisms, they are able to make the materials required for their maintenance or survival. So they can prepare these materials on their own. But are these two materials sufficient for the growth of the plant? A plant has to grow, not only meeting its energy requirements. So apart from the energy requirement, there are another requirements. Even plant has to repair its tissues. Even the plants, they have to grow. They should flower. They should produce fruits and seeds, so by that they can reproduce. So to make the new parts and cells, apart from these glucose and starch, some other materials and molecules are required by plants. So plants, they need proteins. Plants, they have to make proteins in their body, amino acids in their bodies, and fats in their bodies. How these new molecules are prepared? So to make proteins, nitrogen is required, because to make carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, these are enough. These are present. Hydrogen and oxygen is present in water, and this is present in carbon dioxide. Carbon is present in carbon dioxide. So plant is getting carbon, hydrogen, oxygen from carbon dioxide and water. But to make proteins, what is required? Nitrogen is required. So where is the nitrogen? Nitrogen is present in the atmosphere. Air has got lot of nitrogen. 78% of air is nitrogen. So can the plant directly breathe in the nitrogen from the atmosphere through its stomata? No, it is not possible. Plants cannot breathe nitrogen. They cannot use the nitrogen in gaseous form which is in the air. So the nitrogen present in the air cannot be taken by the plants. So what do? How do they meet their nitrogen requirements? Apart from the nitrogen, they need other materials, other elements like phosphorus, sulfur, zinc. From where do they get these materials? So plants, they get water from the soil, they absorb through the roots, they get carbon dioxide from the air through the stomata. The plants also get nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, zinc and other kind of mineral salts which are required for the formation of new molecules like proteins, amino acids, vitamins and different materials to make their new cells for the growth. They get all these minerals from the soil. So soil is the source of all these minerals to the plants. So from where do these minerals come to the soil? Especially nitrogen. It is the most important mineral needed for the growth of the plant. From where does this nitrogen comes to the soil? So nitrogen, it reaches the soil. The nitrogen which is present in the air, it comes to the soil by different processes, by the physical process like lightning and by the biological process like nitrogen fixing bacteria. So the plants, they may use the inorganic nitrites and nitrates present in the soil or the nitrogenous compounds that are formed by the bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria present in the soil. So in this way, the atmospheric nitrogen is fixed into the soil. So these nitrogenous compounds are taken up by the plant, that is along with the water from the root. So these minerals are supplied to different parts, and by mixing these nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur and all these things to the primary material glucose and starch, several biochemical reactions takes place and a variety of biomolecules are formed in the plant's body. So these biomolecules are used for its repair, for its growth, for the formation of flowers, fruits and different things. So in this way, the autotrophic nutrition, it helps the plants to meet the requirement of molecules needed for the maintenance of life and for the growth and development of the autotrophic organisms. Now let us look at the heterotrophic nutrition. This is the another mode of nutrition in which the organisms, they depend on other organisms for their food requirements, for their energy requirements. Let us see how. So again, in this heterotrophic nutrition, here the mode of nutrition of an organism, it depends upon the type of the food and availability of the food. So how is that? What type of food it is and how it is available? For example, you see certain foods are stationary, means the food of cow is stationary. It is grass, it stays still there on the land. So the cow has to go and eat the grass, even the goat. But whereas in some cases the food is mobile, that means it moves. The animal has to hunt it, the animal has to catch it. Say for example lion or tiger, it has to hunt its food because the food is running. So in this way, the way it obtains the food is different depending upon the type of food and availability of the food. And these organisms, they have different strategies in the mode of their nutrition. Certain organisms, they break down the food outside their bodies, or they may take the food which is being broken down, and they use the nutrients. But certain organisms, they take the food into their bodies first, then they digest the food. Like us, we eat the food, later we digest it. So the organisms which feed on the food which is being broken down are called as saprophytes, and the mode of nutrition is called as saprophytic. Saprophytes are also a part of heterotrophs. So the saprophytic nutrition is also a part of heterotrophic nutrition. What does this saprophytic nutrition means? It means if the organisms are feeding on the organism which is already died and broken down, being broken down. For example, we see that mold, fungus, all kind of fungus, mold, bread molds, mushrooms. So what are these? These are a kind of fungus. What does this fungus do? Fungus, it cannot prepare its own food. So it is not an autotroph. It depends on other organisms for the food. It cannot eat the organism and digest it. It is not having the complex system and structure to digest the food. So what does it do? It is feeding on the decaying matter. That means, for example, a rotten wooden log. A wooden log is being rotten in the wet rain. So after the rain, the bark of the wooden log becomes rotten. So at this time, the nutrients are readily available. So by that, these molds grow. In the same way, any organism is died. After the organism is dead, it is fed by a lot of different bacteria and fungus. So the fungus, it feeds on the decaying matter. Such mode of nutrition is called as saprophytic mode of nutrition, and such organisms are called as saprophytes. So here the breakdown of the food takes place outside the body. They cannot break down the food inside their bodies. They don't have any structures, they don't have any special enzymes to do the job. So that is saprophytic. What is the other case? See, animals like cat, dog, we the human beings, birds and reptiles, many of these animals, they eat the food. So after eating the food is digested in their stomach with the help of certain chemicals called as enzymes. So with the help of enzymes, the food is digested, that is converted into complex form to simple form. So these simple nutrients are absorbed into the blood, supplied to the cells, and helps for the maintenance, growth and various activities of the organisms. So that is breakdown of food inside the body, example humans and all the other higher animals. We also find one more kind of nutrition here, that is parasitic mode of nutrition. This also comes under the heterotrophic mode of nutrition. But here the organisms, they do not kill the other organism, just they feed on it. Here in this case, we can find certain plants also under this heterotrophic nutrition. But basically here we are talking about these animals which eat the other animals or which may eat the other plants. So here in this parasitic mode of nutrition, we see parasitic plants and parasitic animals. Under the parasitic plants, you see that we can take that Cuscuta. Cuscuta is a plant which is having a special structure called as haustoria, by which it sucks the juices from other plants and it feeds on the other plants. So it is dependent on the other plants for the nutrients, but it is not killing the other plant. So that is what an example for the parasitic plant and parasitic mode of nutrition, which comes under heterotrophic nutrition. And the other animals that come under this parasitic nutrition are leech. Leech, it feeds on the blood of animal. It does not kill. Even the ticks or mites. Ticks or mites. And you can say that mosquitoes. So these are the examples of the parasitic organisms. So we see these different kinds of modes of nutrition under heterotrophic nutrition. So that is saprophytic mode of nutrition, where the organisms are dependent on decaying matter, and parasitic mode of nutrition, where the organisms do not kill the other organism but feed on them. Just they live on them and get the materials from them. So this is about the heterotrophic nutrition. Now let us see the heterotrophic nutrition in humans. Before we look how the human digestive system is organized and how the process of nutrition, that is how the food obtained and how the food is digested in the human digestive system, before that, let us discuss how different organisms obtain their food. So what are the various means, what are the various structures that help the organisms to obtain the food? So different organisms, they have different parts to get their food. You see an elephant, how does it get its food? It uses its trunk to pluck the leaves and fruits and put the leaves and fruits in its mouth. It has got mouth parts to chew and eat. Even we have hands to catch the food and eat it through our mouth. So mouth is the point at which the food enters our body. So this is all the case of multicellular organisms and well-developed organisms. They have well-developed structures to get the food. Then how about single-celled organisms? Say for example, amoeba. Amoeba is a single-celled organism. How does it get its food? Amoeba is an aquatic organism, lives in the moist and wet places in the water. It is a single-celled organism. It has only one cell throughout its life. Its body is made up of one cell. Then how can it possess special structures here? When the food is close to amoeba, so this amoeba, it produces some special folds in its cell membrane. This is only one cell. This is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is folded like this and it gives out some projections called as pseudopodia, false feet. So these protrusions or extensions, they encircle the food like this. So the food is engulfed by the paramecium. So in this way, the food is brought into the cell of the paramecium. Inside the cells, the enzymes are present to digest the food. That means to convert the food into useful materials. And the undigested food is sent out of the body surface through contractile vacuoles. That is by the contractile vacuoles. And here these are the pseudopodium, false feet. So in this way, in case of amoeba, the special modification of the cell membrane, it helps to get the food. So in the same way, if you see the other unicellular organism like paramecium, it is also called as a slipper animalcule because of the slipper shape. It has got a special groove called as oral groove. Oral groove. So this oral groove has got some hair-like structures on its body and even in the oral groove. These are called as cilia. So the food is passed through this oral groove into the body. There is a point, specific point at which the food enters into the paramecium. So the paramecium, it moves in the water. Because of the water currents, the food, it moves in this way and the food gets trapped in the oral groove and it is engulfed, taken into the body. So here for the movements, the hair-like structures called as cilia help the paramecium to obtain its food. But you can notice the difference between amoeba and paramecium. Amoeba, it has no specific spot for the intake of food. From any side it can produce the pseudopodia and take the food. There is no specific site of food intake in case of amoeba. Whereas in case of paramecium, there is a specific site for the food intake. Even you have a specific site to take the food in. That is our mouth. You cannot take the food through your ears or hands. Of course, you take help of your hands, but the food has to enter your body through the mouth. So that is the difference we find. So this is the case of unicellular organisms. How do they obtain their food? Now let us see the human digestive system, the starting point of the digestive system, from where the food enters and how the food is processed, how the useful materials from the food are extracted, absorbed and utilized. So let us look at the nutrition in human beings. It's carried out by a complex and well-organized system, a well-organized structure called the alimentary canal. So the process of digestion, the process of nutrition takes place in this alimentary canal. So this is a long tube-like structure. Let us see the description, the various parts of the human alimentary canal. The human alimentary canal begins at the mouth and it ends at the anus. It is a long coiled tube which has got various modifications. You can see the difference of the tube here. At this region it is like a bag-like structure. Again it is like some pipe-like structure in the intestines. So this way this long coiled tube is extended from mouth to the anus. So it is modified into different shapes as it has to perform different functions at each stage, at each place. And one more thing we can observe here, this alimentary canal is associated with some glands. Different glands are attached to this alimentary canal. You can see the liver, it is attached to the human alimentary canal, and the gallbladder and pancreas. Pancreas is also attached. So these glands, they secrete some secretions. They pour their secretions into the alimentary canal, which help in the chemical digestion part. So now let us see the various parts. It starts with mouth and the long extending tube from the mouth to the stomach. This tube is called as esophagus. It is also called as food pipe. And here the esophagus is connected to the stomach. So the esophagus, it is passing through a muscular wall which separates the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. This is the abdominal cavity and this is the chest cavity. Both are separated by a muscular valve called as diaphragm. So the diaphragm, this esophagus, it passes through the diaphragm and it enters into the stomach. Stomach is a muscular bag-like structure in which the process of digestion takes place, physical digestion. So from the stomach, you can see that at the end of the stomach, glands are connected like liver, pancreas, all are connected, and it continues as small intestine, and the small intestine, it continues as large intestine, and the undigested food is passed through the large intestine, reaches the rectum, and from there through anus it is excreted out. So here are the various parts of the human alimentary canal. Now let us see the process of digestion in humans. There is a various kinds of changes happens to the food in the human alimentary canal. Let us begin with the mouth. The food we take, it has got different textures. We eat apples, we eat bananas, we eat rice, we eat chapatis. So in this way we eat different kinds of food. Each has got different texture, different level of hardness, different amount of water in them. Some foods are very dry, some foods are very hard like nuts. Some foods are very soft and juicy, watery. So all these foods are to be made uniform. The complex parts or bits of food should be made into simple and easy to absorb material. So the food has to be made into a fine form, smooth and soft form. So from there the nutrients can be easily absorbed into the blood circulatory system, into the body. So this is achieved by this total apparatus, the digestion of the food. Here the food has to be converted into smaller bits that takes place by a process called mastication, chewing of food. So whatever the food we take, just we do not swallow it. If you see birds, they do not swallow, they don't have teeth. Birds, they swallow the grains. But it is not like in case of birds. In human digestive system, first chewing takes place. So as soon as you keep the food in your mouth, you have to chew the food. What happens to the food in the mouth? Here, two kind of things happen in the mouth. One is physical physical change takes place to the food, and the second one is chemical. Chemical change takes place to the food. One is physical change, the other one is chemical change. What is the physical change that happens to the food? So with the help of the structures present in our mouth, what are the various structures we have? We have teeth, tongue. These are the two structures that help to make the food into smaller bits. That is, we have different types of teeth like incisors, canines, premolars and molars to cut, tear, grind and chew the food. And tongue helps to move the food in a proper way, so by that the food is properly distributed under the teeth and it is thoroughly mixed with the other liquid, important liquid, that is secreted, saliva. So saliva is a liquid that is secreted by the salivary glands in our mouth. This saliva gets mixed up with the food, so it makes the food into a paste. So all the food is uniformly ground into a fine paste by chewing. So it makes the food soft. So by that we can easily swallow it. If it is not soft, you cannot swallow. So this is achieved by this saliva. So the physical digestion, that means the hard bits of food is made into smooth, soft, bolus. So by that it can easily pass through the esophagus. So that is what happens in the mouth, the physical part. And what about the chemical part? So physically the food is made into soft form. Chemically what happens to the food? The food we are chewing, what we are chewing is well mixed with a liquid called saliva. Saliva not only helps to make the food watery, not only helps to make the food paste, it also contains certain enzymes called salivary amylase. Salivary amylase. So this is a chemical compound, an enzyme which act on the certain nutrients like carbohydrates that we eat in our food. So partially a bit of digestion takes place in the mouth itself. Food is partially digested in the mouth. Which part of the food? Carbohydrates are partly digested, that is by the action of salivary amylase. This salivary amylase, it digests the carbohydrates into simpler form, some simpler form. So the food is processed physically as well as chemically in the mouth. So once the food is made into a fine paste and a part of food is digested by salivary amylase, now the food is bolus and it is ready to be swallowed, sent down into the next part of the alimentary canal. So now here the food which is chewed well is made into a paste, soft. So this soft paste kind of food is easily passed in the esophagus. But how does this paste, the bolus food, moves in the esophagus? So esophagus is a long tube which is lined by some mucus. It is a long tube, but even then the food cannot simply pass in the esophagus because the food is not completely watery. The food is not completely a liquid. It is a paste kind of thing. So it has to be moved down in the esophagus. So that is achieved by the circular muscles present in the esophagus. So the esophagus has got longitudinal and circular muscles which produce a wave-like contractions and relaxations. So this kind of contractions and relaxations, if this is the food, so they have a contraction and relaxation. The circular muscles present here, they contract and push the food downwards. And the longitudinal muscles, they contract and relax. So the circular and longitudinal muscles contract and relax and push the food downwards. So these contractions and relaxations are wave-like and they are called as peristaltic movements. Peristaltic movements. So these peristaltic movements help the food to pass through the esophagus into the stomach. There is no digestion in the esophagus. Esophagus is just a passage, a tube, through which the food passes from mouth to the stomach. That's all. So no other digestion takes place in this part. Only the peristaltic movements push the food downwards into the stomach. Now let us look at the features of the stomach. Stomach is a sac-like or a bag-like organ. It expands as soon as the food enters into it. It increases in size. It is a stretchable organ, muscular organ. So the food enters into the stomach. So even in the stomach, just like in mouth. In case of mouth, we have seen the food is digested in two ways. One is physical and second one is chemical. There is chemical processing, physical processing. In the same way, the stomach also does the grinding in two ways. Physical, grinding the food, churning the food, making the food into very soft and soft and soft. The fine paste called as chyme. So then the fine paste can enter the intestines for the remaining process. So that is the physical part of the stomach. What does it do physically? It churns the food. So the walls of this stomach, they secrete some kind of substances. The walls of the stomach consist of gastric glands which secrete HCl, hydrochloric acid, and pepsin, an enzyme, and mucus. What does this HCl do? It helps in the digestion of proteins. And at the same time, pepsin, an enzyme, it helps in the digestion of proteins. It converts the proteins into peptones and mucus. So the hydrochloric acid which is secreted into the stomach, this hydrochloric acid, it provides an acidic medium for the process of digestion, and that at the same time it kills the bacteria that enter the stomach through the food. So we are eating the food which may contain bacteria. So these bacteria are killed by the action of this hydrochloric acid. So that is the function of this HCl and pepsin. Then what does this mucus do? Mucus, it lines the walls of the stomach. It gives a protective layer for the walls, so by that the walls are not damaged by the HCl. So sometimes if there is any problem with the mucus, if the mucus layers are degenerated or spoiled, then we feel some burning sensation in the stomach. It may lead to some kind of lesions in the stomach which are called as ulcers or gastric problem, burning sensation in the stomach. That is the problem with the secretion and the layers of the mucus. So generally the mucus is secreted to protect the inner walls of the stomach from the action of this HCl. So inside the stomach, the proteins are partially digested, proteins are converted into peptones and other form, and the gastric juices, they chemically as well as physically, the food is digested, made into very soft and fine form. So here, till the food is made into soft form, it is not released into the intestine. Who controls that? Here is a sphincter, pyloric sphincter. So the sphincter, it will not allow the food till it is completely made into soft. So once the food is made into soft, paste-like one called as chyme, the sphincter muscles slowly release some amount of food into the intestines. The food is not released as a whole into the intestines. The food is released part by part by the pyloric sphincter. Sphincter is a valve kind of thing made up of muscles. It slowly releases the food from the stomach. The lower part of the stomach has got the finer food which is made into fine paste. Here the upper part, it contains the food which is having bigger particles. Still it is digesting. But here it is completely fine food is formed. So the fine form is slowly enters into the intestine through this pyloric sphincter. The sphincter slowly releases the food into the small intestine. Now let us see what happens to the food in the small intestine. So the food which is made into fine paste called as chyme is sent into this small intestine through this sphincter. So the food at which it is attached to the small intestine, there we can see some glands are attached to the alimentary canal. One is liver and other one is pancreas. So these two glands, liver and pancreas, they secrete their secretions into the small intestine. So these secretions, they also help in the chemical part of digestion. If you look at the pancreas, here we find the pancreas. So the pancreas, it secretes pancreatic juice which consists of trypsin and lipase, these enzymes. So the trypsin and lipase, the trypsin helps in the breakdown of proteins to peptones, lipase helps in breakdown of lipids. Anyway, initially the lipids, as they are in the form of a big molecules or a big droplets, they cannot be easily digested by lipase. So that reason the liver secretes a substance called as bile. The bile, it carries out a process called emulsification. After emulsification, the lipids are digested by the lipase. What is this emulsification? Say for example, if you take a glass of water And in the water, you kept some drops of oil. So this oil, it floats on the water. And how do you find the oil? Like big droplets, like coins. So in the same way, if you eat some oily food, some puri, some chapati, something which has got much oil, so this oil also floats in your stomach in the liquids in the form of big droplets. So if the fat is in the form of big droplets, the enzymes, they cannot act. They need more surface. If it is a very big droplet, the enzymes on the surface, they cannot break the fats. They must be formed into small droplets, then more enzyme can act on it. So the breakdown of big fat droplets into tiny droplets is emulsification. You are given a glass of water and some oil poured on it, and you are asked to make the oil into very fine droplets. What do? You will try to shake it. So even though by physical shaking, the oil cannot be broken down to small droplets. Again, the small droplets join together to form big droplets. Then, if you mix some amount of detergent powder, some surf, detergent powder to this glass, then the detergent powder, it makes the oil droplets very small. This is called as emulsification. So that is what happens in our intestine by the action of the bile salts. So the bile juices are secreted by the liver, which contain bile salts and bile acids. These bile juices, they help in the emulsification of fats, making the big fat globules into tiny particles. So by that, the enzymes like lipase, they act on the fat particle. It can be digested to fatty acids. So fats are the complex molecules and fatty acids are the simpler molecules. So these complex fats are converted to simple fatty acids. So the fatty acids can be absorbed in the small intestine into the bloodstream. And trypsin, it converts the big protein molecules into small peptones. But even then, the peptones cannot be absorbed into our blood. They should be broken down into still smaller. That is achieved by the other hormones secreted by the intestinal juice. The walls of the intestine, small intestine, also secrete some juices which contain the peptidases, sucrases, maltases, lipase, intestinal lipase. So these peptidases, they convert the peptones into amino acids. So the digestion is finalized in the small intestine. It is completely digested. No more digestion is required. The complex food is made into very fine and simple molecules which can be easily absorbed into the blood. So these enzymes like peptidases, they convert the peptones to amino acids. Sucrases, they convert the sucrose into glucose. Maltases convert the maltose into glucose. And intestinal lipase converts the fats into fatty acids. So these are the very simple molecules. Fatty acids, amino acids and glucose. These are the very simple molecules. So all the complex food which we have eaten is broken down in the mouth. It is churned in the stomach. It is made into very fine paste. The fine paste is mixed with many chemicals and chemical digestion took place. Finally, that food which we ate, it turned into very simple substances like amino acids, fatty acids, glucose. Now they are ready for absorption. So for this complete process of digestion in the small intestine, these glands and their secretions are helping. Pancreatic juices and liver secretes bile, and intestinal juice or succus entericus, it consists of these hormones it consists of these enzymes which digest the food completely. So the digestion of the food completes in the small intestine. Small intestine is a very long organ and coiled. Even though it is very long, it fits in a very small space because of its coiling. So because of the coiling, the lengthy intestine is fit in a small space. So the length of the small intestine, it varies in different animals, depends upon the food they eat. Certain animals, they only eat meat, flesh of other animals. So they don't need very large small intestine because meat can be easily digested in a shorter time. So the length of the small intestine can be small. But whereas the animals like cow and buffalo which eat only grass, the grass consists of cellulose, it requires very long time for digestion. So they need a very long small intestine. So the length of the small intestine is varied in different animals. It depends upon the food they eat. Anyway, the process of digestion is completed in the small intestine. Now what happened to the undigested food? So now, what happens to the undigested food? the undigested food is sent into the large intestine. So what about the digested food? The food is digested and made into very small and simple and absorbable form in the small intestine. Now, the nutrients from this digested food are absorbed into the bloodstream, blood circulation, because blood has to transport the nutrients to each and every cell for maintenance, for repair and for other purposes. So, if you see the cross section of small intestine, this is the wall of the small intestine. The small intestine has got so many foldings, finger-like structures. So, why these many foldings are there here? This is to increase the area of absorption. If the surface is folded, there is more area for absorption. Nutrients can be absorbed. So, here we can find some microvilli, tiny finger-like structures. If you see the finger-like structure in an enlarged microscope or something, in enlarged view, it will be like this, and all around the nutrients are absorbed, and inside the villi it is richly supplied with blood vessels. So these blood vessels, they absorb the nutrients here, and these nutrients are supplied to the blood circulatory system, the bloodstream. They are supplied to different cells. So from the digested food, the nutrients are absorbed, the water is absorbed. So these nutrients and water and everything is absorbed, and the remaining undigested food with some nutrients which are not absorbed and some water enters into the large intestine. So in the large intestine, the water is reabsorbed into the body, into the blood, because the water is needed for other purposes, other activities. The food, the undigested food is hardened, and this hardened food moves through the large intestine all around the colon, and it reaches the rectum and finally excreted through anus.